I'm 7 episodes into Amazon's new TV series Gen V, and so far I think there's a pretty glaring issue. We'll start by speaking a little bit more broadly, but then we'll dive into some of the technical details and talk about what I think the show is missing out on. So far, the biggest issue with the show has to be with where the antagonism is coming from. I almost feel like Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out which character I should care about and which scenes I should be tense in. Because almost every issue, besides the main plot line with the dean of the school, seems to be resolved at the end of each episode. I don't really think it's accidental, given that the dean is hiding her secret operation under the school, but I won't say too much yet in case you guys are still watching it. But I do think this called for having multiple other forces of antagonism that were sustained for longer than just, 1 or 2 episodes. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to have the social environment of the school act as a force of antagonism, with the main character Marie, suddenly stepping into a hyper-competitive, high-class environment of these superheroes who typically have their powers run in the family and are vying for that #1 spot at the school. I thought that would be a good opportunity for lots of antagonism that's sustained with her competing with other superheroes. Could have been really cool, but that died pretty quickly. That idea, that antagonism died relatively quickly, I think, after about the second episode. And even after she's involved with Golden Boy's death, I think it's in episode 1 or episode 2, Golden Boy's entire friend group is pretty quick to forgive and then accept her back. And so that was just another instance of that force of antagonism, that tension dissolving relatively quickly, when I think it could have been sustained over the course of, multiple other episodes, maybe some competition there where they're trying to sabotage her for that #1 spot, something like that. So we're left with these, 1 episode plot lines that dissolve pretty quick, like the journalist Tech Knight. We're actually going to take a look at some of his scenes and some of the technical aspects of those scenes. But he dives into Golden Boy's death, and he does actually reveal something pretty interesting about the dean of the school, but he's immediately shut down and then just leaves the case cold, decides to leave the school. So that was another plot line that was just completely dissolved after 1 episode. I also don't know if I enjoy the main protagonist all that much. I don't think it's the actress's fault or the character to say. I just think that there's not as much being done with her past in the current plot lines. For instance, I think they're doing more interesting things with Emma's character. There's more relevant and pressing matters that she's dealing with, like her mom actively trying to create a demeaning reality TV show about her and her powers. And she's also dealing with everyone mocking her at the school because of her online presence, trying to build that. I feel like it's different from Marie because, she does have a troubled past. But I feel like those issues aren't manifested in the present day plot lines in the same way as Emma's character. Really, after Professor Brinkerhoff's death, I feel like a lot of the tension of her being expelled and with her past being revealed to the rest of the school kind of dissolves after his death, because I feel like he was the one that was initially in the position to reveal that information, or at least to do something against her with that information, like expel her. And finally, I feel like the idea of the team rescuing Sam is slightly silly. It does make sense that they're trying to break out people because they're basically being tortured by the dean of the school, and especially in episode 7, but I won't say any spoilers. But it's still odd that they're bringing Sam out into public when he is dealing with these psychotic breaks, and he goes on killing rampages when pressed or pursued by the members of the school. And so it'll be pretty interesting to see where that plot line goes. But I did think that it was a little bit odd that, given that Emma has seen him kind of go through these psychotic breaks, that they're still bringing him out into public and risking the people around them kind of like that. But enough of the broad strokes stuff that I'm talking about here. Let's jump into some of the technical aspects of the series. And I want to talk about something that I feel like is a commonality with scenes where they're trying to build drama, but also something that they're kind of missing out on developing. So let's jump into it. All right, let me cut my other monitor on real quick. Hide that panel. All right, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you want to make something look dramatic, just make it green. That's something that you'll see a lot in some of these images we're taking a look at today, where they've introduced a lot of green artificially to kind of create that drama. And we'll take a look at the difference between, motivated light and then light that's just been pushed in either in the grade or on set. You don't really know, but light that isn't quite as naturalistic. And so we're going to take a look at a couple of scenes from the first couple of episodes, as well as a couple different settings, a couple different environments, see the commonalities that they're pushing into these images, specifically with color. But let's start here. So I always like to work globally. We'll start with offset. A lot of this image is green. If we pull up the vector scope, everything's pulled down into those cooler colors. So what if we took offset? I'm going to look at my calibrated monitor here and pulled a lot of that out to create a more natural look. Let's start here with just this quick adjustment. If I jumped ahead in the video, just know that the only thing I've done here is it's just offset. I've just pulled straight up on offset. Let me full screen for this. You can see the difference here. All I've touched is offset, and it's kind of set all the colors in a more balanced position, whereas before everything was pulled really green. You can see in the shadows here. I hope my cursor is on. You know what? Let me check. All right, full screen this again. So you can see a lot of the shadows down here in the skin, especially if I look at the calibrated monitor. You can see everything's a little bit unnatural. And what I've done here is just pushed that opposite. You could do the same thing with just tint. If you wanted to maybe even pull that back just a hair, might have pushed a little bit out. But you can create a look kind of like this. And then if you want to see if you're heading in the right direction, try to put some saturation back in. So with just the saturation, and then you turn off those corrections, you can really see the green popping. And then see if you can correct that out. Obviously, it's going to make her skin pop a little bit too much, but we're talking about that green and not necessarily her skin. Typically, what I'm doing when I'm working with skin is I work pretty globally. So I'm not going to start with a qualifier. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start with a broad range of skin tone there. Increase that out. Grab here, increase that out. So that's typically what I'm doing with skin tone. Let me grab this back because that was a little bit funky. Then you can rotate skin like that. So for this image, it's a bit too saturated. Come in here, lower saturation, sure. Spread that out so you're not creating any artifacting. Okay, so that's with saturation pumped up, but with her skin being kind of pushed down. And then that's with that green cast trying to be eliminated. You could even go into hue v hue because they have such a strong green cast in that backdrop and try to correct that out that way by either pushing some blue into it or maybe pushing a little bit of warmth into it. Spread that out once again so you're not creating any kind of artifacting. And then you can see what's happening to that background. Obviously it is being broken up a little bit, but check out the difference there, introducing a little bit of like gold, orange, yellow, tungsten-y, something you might find naturally in in a bathroom, something like that, something a little bit more natural. And I just think that is such a better look while still retaining kind of that realistic quality, because that's the other thing I feel like they're missing. I feel like with The Boys and with this show, the whole purpose of what's happening is showing these heroes in kind of a realistic environment, showing what would actually happen if these people existed, the universities they'd go to, the classes they would take, the daily lives, kind of the troubles they would face politically and socially. And so I feel like the grading and the world that's presented through the visuals should be a little bit closer to something that's more natural. something that doesn't separate me so much from the frame. But this isn't just this film. This is a commonality with, a lot of TV shows, a lot of images which are supposed to be dramatic. They introduce a lot of green. You can see it with this. Let me full screen this one right here. Here's before. It's just the same two nodes, and after. Before and after. It's definitely revealing on these bricks. It's revealing in the shadows of her dress. Look at this one here. Yeah. So something that's just a little bit more natural. You take a look at this, and it looks more like what you would expect, a bathroom like this to look like, with kind of this yellow, warm lighting compared to this kind of gritty green that they're introducing. And so I think it makes the skin tones sit a little bit more naturally. It allows colors to sit a little bit on a natural palette, this red to pop a little bit more. Everything just looks a little bit more naturalistic. And I think because of that, it reflects, what I feel like they could have been going for, which is something, which are these elevated, these superhero people in the real world. So let's jump on over to the next clip, because that's it for that one. That was a really quick correction. Let's see if we can find a wide on this. Yeah. So same thing. It's always a good opportunity when you have these really high values up in the highlights to be pushed a little bit more toward warm, and then to have the rest of the image, which are sitting kind of in midtones and below, to be pushed a little bit cool. You get a nice color contrast that way. But what if we wanted to do the same thing, kind of correct some of that out? All right, I'll walk you through what I've done here, because I had to do something. I had to rely not only on offset, but also lift gamma gain. I've taken some of that orange out of the highlights, and then I've reduced some of the coolness of the shadows. Let me kind of skim ahead here. So it's really revealing along this light shaft here, and then along kind of just the texture of the wall, the white of the wall back here, and then the lockers back here. You can see how much green there is before and after, and before and after. Like I said, and like I will always say in these videos, if you want to make something look a little bit more dramatic, introduce some green, introduce some of those cooler colors, because they're going to complement skin tones. They're going to complement any kind of warmth you push into the highlights a little bit more. So let's see if this one node I'm doing is just kind of working across the entire scene. So you can see the difference here. See the cooler values off in the midtones and the shadows, and these really warm values up in the highlights, then that being neutralized. And this one here as well, you can see kind of the green on the ground, and then that's neutralized out. And on this shot here, all that green just being neutralized out. So that's how you might create kind of a more natural palette from something which is elevated like this. Okay, and let's look at, let me find the right frame to stop on. I think that's a good one. Okay, here's another instance of green kind of being pushed in, because you can look up here at these lights. They're kind of neutral. These lights are tungsten, so 56 tungsten, and yet everything's just kind of, all this green is just seeping in. It's a little bit unnatural, and it's done solely for the purpose of this looking like a dreadful place. What if we wanted to, say we wanted everything to look a little bit more balanced out, a little bit more even, because you're dealing with so many different values here. You might have to go into these individual channels like gain, because those were looking pretty good. Correct those back to as neutral as possible. Go into gamma. Realistically, the whites of these walls would be sitting closer to white, or perhaps on this side a little bit closer to white, on this side a little bit closer to that 3200K value. And the goal, in my opinion, the goal here would just be to make it look, as you've lit it, make it look a little bit more natural. And in doing so, you're actually increasing this color separation. And if you look at the vector scope, you're getting a pretty nice teal and orange look just naturally. Whereas before, everything was kind of almost being compressed down to that one value. Here's a quick before and after. Once again, just trying to neutralize out that kind of artificial green that they're seeping into the midtone and highlights. And so what that calls for is actually going into gamma and lift and subtracting those cooler values, but then going back into your gain and trying to reintroduce them back so that the whites of the lights up here aren't being affected as much. So that's what that might look like there. And once again, the biggest thing I feel like stylistically, narratively, this kind of look could have achieved is that you're trying to stay as true to a natural environment as possible to showcase these superheroes in that natural environment, which is just an opportunity that I think is missed, but I think is definitely nailed in this scene, which is why we're jumping over to this one. This scene does not have that color cast that we've looked at in the past with those other images. For instance, if it did, you might be looking at an image more comparable to this. Let's see if I can pull some of that out. So if we look at, what it could have been, and like I say, by just introducing green, this is kind of what you end up with. And you can definitely see it here, kind of what that could have looked like and what I could have realistically seen this looking like if you're just pushing that green in artificially. But that is not the case. This is a very natural palette, and the reason this is so visually interesting is because you have these practicals in the back at 3200. You've got the fire in the wide shot that I was just at, which you can actually see on her skin here, flickering. So you've got the fire at a really warm tone, and yet you have these really blue lights being motivated by the moonlight in the back, and yet it isn't creating this nasty blue haze in the background. So let's keep going here. Same thing, you've got the fire here, you've got these lights, everything in a really warm value, which sits really nicely on their skin. And then you have these pops of blue in the background here. You got a hair light back here, really blue here. But in the costuming especially, you have this really saturated, another blue light here, just to take note of it. So color contrast there. But you've got this really, really saturated blue coat on this character here, which works really well to separate her and to make that color contrast a little bit more cohesive when you cut to her, because she's got this nice orange and saturated skin among this blue coat here. And then in the back of every shot on all these people, you have these tungsten practicals, which are allowed to sit really warm. And you've got this pop of blue in the back of these shots. You can see really warm here, pop of blue in the back. Even here, pop of blue in the back, really warm light hitting her. You still got the blue in the background here, little bit of blue here, blue light, blue lamp here, but this beautiful kind of neutral color hitting her. And then you have the warmth of the fire and the warmth of those practicals. So this is a really nice look that's achieved through actually separating the values. And you can see on the vector scope, really stretching the values between orange and those warm values and the really cool values, but they're doing it practically. And they're doing it with practical lights. They're doing it with motivated lights. And they're also doing it with some of the costuming, which works really, really well. So every shot, there's a lot of motivation for the values that are being represented. And then obviously just beautiful fall off, really nice bokeh in the background, really nice push in. So this looks really nice. This is something which feels, natural. It feels of this world. And I think because of that, it's a very well executed, scene. So there's nothing unnatural about the way this is lit. That's why I really like it. Let's jump on over to the next one here. This is that fake ad I was talking about for the school. We're going to look at the difference between, how do you go from images that look like this suddenly to you cut to how it actually looks here in the TV show, final product. What's the difference here? So if we take this still, Grab that still, go back to the wide of the skull. I think it's somewhere here. There it is. And then grab that still. What's the difference? What's the difference here? And what have I been saying about creating some of that drama? Let's take a look at the vector scopes of both. This one has a pretty wide range of values from some of the greens up to the red, orange values. You can see the greens of the grass down here, the reddish orange of the building, and then the grass up top here. Then if we switch over to this one, we can see that a lot of those values are actually compressed. A lot of those greens are brought up to kind of these yellows. And so it's actually a compressing of the values here. And so if we were to take this image here, kind of push it up toward those values. Okay. And then you end up with something kind of like this. Pretty close. It's in the same realm. You can look at how they're taking something which is supposed to be very natural, very saturated, poppy, neutral look, and clearly shot with like a high aperture. Everything's in focus. This isn't meant to be stylistic, and yet you can change it to have some of the characteristics of a shot from the final finished version of the TV series like this, just by introducing some different color. And obviously you're not going to get those kind of aesthetic qualities of the camera and of the lens, but you can get pretty close in terms of what you're doing with the color. Just by looking at those values, by looking at the vector scope, trying to mimic the general, I'm not going to say curve, but the general layout of this vector scope, you can start to recreate some of those looks just by seeing where the colors are being presented in this one, and then correcting it kind of toward that. And then lastly, we will talk about, what's the difference between a shot like this, which feels kind of almost like a cheap TV show, and then a shot like this, which is the final product of the TV series here. And it's interesting that you're getting to see this shot, which is kind of mimicking, cheap, almost reality TV, crime, drama, something you'd see played on like a local TV show, and then cut back to this, which is, made to look a little bit more gritty, made to look like a true big budget production. So let's take a look at this. So first off, you have a more standard aspect ratio of 16:9. So if I were to just zoom this in, it's 16:9, kind of standard. And let me separate these. Whereas this one is 235, presumably 235 to 1. It could be something a little bit wider, a little bit tighter. But also what you're seeing in terms of lens choice is that this is anamorphic. You can see from kind of the rounding off on the corners. Just out here, you can see that it's a de-squeezed image. So they're presumably shooting anamorphic. I'd be very surprised if they weren't. But if you look at the quality of the highlights, you can see this really nice blooming effect. Let me full screen this. See this really nice blooming effect. So the highlights aren't quite as harsh, even though this is a very harsh lighting situation here. It's still blown out. You're not getting any detail here, but you are getting this really nice blooming effect around the highlights to kind of soften that roll off. And so that's very nice. And then in addition, you are getting the color, which, as I said, you want to make something look dramatic. You want to make something look good and high quality. Just push the color in a given direction. It depends on the mood of what you're trying to accomplish, but typically green for that grit and that drama works really well. And I think something like this is where I'm at. So with the colors balanced as best as I can, this is kind of the difference you might see, but it really starts to become prevalent. It starts to become really prominent, these green values, once you see kind of something that's a little bit more balanced. And then especially compared to this, it just goes to show you some of the, how far the technical will get you, how far the lens choice will get you, how far what you expose to will get you. So that's some of the differences in the technical qualities. And that's kind of the difference that you might get if you were to balance this towards something a little bit more neutral. And like I said, something that I feel like The Boys and this show should really be aiming to do, because they're trying to make it as realistic as possible and trying to show what this environment would actually be like for these superheroes going to college and stuff like that. But that's going to be it for this video. Really appreciate if you guys stuck around this far. Let me know if you have any questions about what I'm doing here, or if there's another TV show you would like to see. For all the people who have watched my Harry Potter series, I haven't abandoned that. I'm going to be jumping on to Harry Potter 7, Part 1 and 2 very shortly, doing some of the same things I'm doing here, and then look forward to jumping on some of the other TV shows that you guys have recommended for me. So thank you for sticking around, and have a good one.